once again, we've given the stream a facelift. It seemed only appropriate, if we're going to be talking space, to have a few stars. Yeah. So, I'm not entirely sure why he did it, but when I was a young boy, my father at one point decided it was going to be really cool to get me into collecting the mission patches from NASA flights. I think it was because, at the time, I was having a lot of fun learning to type, and it would give me something to research and type at my own pace. Perhaps that ultimately set me up on the path to academic pursuits. Might have been a good parenting choice. The book in question that he gave me to start my research, I still have. Space Patches, From Mercury to the Space Shuttle. And from this work and a little bit of independent research, we assembled this entire binder of notes and patches, and that's what we'll be going through tonight. We even have an extra cam for the purpose. This one right here shall give us a chance to zoom in on the individual patches as we go. So why don't we go ahead and begin. This is the extended vector patch. It's kind of lovely, isn't it? Obviously, the vector is the big deal here. The giant swoosh. Although I kind of like the orbit that is sketched out on it as well. And of course, we have the NASA logo itself, NASA. And a field of stars, some of them forming constellations. Altogether, this is a well-rounded patch that makes one think of space, at least in my opinion. Hello, Bogdan. How are you today? There will be a lot of tapping and light scratching tonight as we trace our way through these. Hello, Dwindo Perche. And what did we have to say about this when we were 10? The extended vector patch is considered by collectors to be the prettiest of the NASA logos. It was designed by the Army Institute of Heraldry. The patch is and was worn by all astronauts, usually on the left breast. This patch has been affectionately nicknamed Meatball, because it resembles spaghetti sauce on a meatball. Hello, Dragon Mike. Now we have the more stylized NASA logo. Simple, red on white. Lovely in its simplicity. Let's bring the mic a little closer. Can you hear the scratching? We'll do your name trace in just a moment, Window. This is the current logo of NASA, or at least was as of when I wrote this. It is worn by all astronauts, usually above the right breast, near or above a pocket flap. It is not so affectionately nicknamed Worm. It is slightly modified in souvenir form, with right-angle edges instead of rounded, which means this is a real one, not a souvenir one, I guess. Oh no, that's probably referring to the edges here, not on the letters. Well, it's still lovely. Let's see, Dwindo. We're gonna surprise you by using a stick. And our third patch from this first page. Gold on black. Good combination. Excellent, Leon. It would be a lot of wasted energy if I was scratching on all of these and no one could hear it. Originally, this black and gold worm was the only version available because the white and red was held back for security reasons. It is much more popular than the other because of the black and gold pattern. Okay, so it's the souvenir patch. 40-year-old paper. Hello, bye-bye. I suppose I should put these back in. The Mercury program, the beginning of U.S. spaceflight. The astronauts of the Mercury program, America's first manned space program, wore only the NASA emblem on their spacesuits. There were no official patches designed for each flight, nor was there a Mercury program patch, as there was for later NASA programs. The Mercury astronauts personalized their missions only by naming their space capsules. There were 6 manned flights in the Mercury program. A research and development vehicle powered by an Atlas D booster was launched on September 9th, 1959. This was followed by the first 2 Mercury missions, which were unmanned and therefore unnamed. Mercury Atlas 1, the first Mercury-designated flight, was attempted in July of 1960. This flight was designed to be a ballistic trajectory test for the unmanned Mercury capsule. It was unsuccessful due to rocket failure. Mercury Redstone 1 was attempted in November of 1960. It was also a test flight that ended in failure when the rocket engines cut out on the launch pad. This led some observers to wonder if NASA was capable of successfully launching a live astronaut. However, in December of 1960, the flight was successfully launched under the same launch designation. Mercury Redstone 2 was launched from Cape Canaveral on January 31, 1961, carrying Ham the chimpanzee, America's first space celebrity. Mercury Atlas 2, 3, and 4, all unmanned hardware tests, were completed by September of 1961. Mercury Redstone 3 became America's first manned flight on the morning of May 5, 1961, when Alan Shepard flew a suborbital 15-minute mission. Shepard wore the NASA logo on his spacesuit. There was no official mission patch. He became the first astronaut to name his craft. He chose Freedom 7 to denote the freedom of the United States and the freedom wrought by man's achievements in space. The 7 was added because his capsule was factory model number 7. Most people thought that the 7 represented the original 7 Mercury astronauts. The astronauts liked that idea so well that all subsequent Mercury flights carried the 7 designation in their names. When the Mercury program ended, a number of souvenir companies and individuals commissioned patches to commemorate the program's achievements. Over the years, certain designs have come to be identified with the various Mercury flights. NASA visitor centers and exchanges now make these emblems available to the collecting public. As a result, they have come to be accepted as the official symbols of those flights. Mercury 3, Shepard, and Freedom 7. A lot to trace here. It's a cute little patch, isn't it? Just a bit of color, yellow and blue, the capsule in white, simplicity itself, as you would expect from the first patch in a series. They will grow more complicated. Hello, Twain. Welcome in. If you do not already know us, we are Gentlebox ASMR, best known for our soft-voiced reading. Today, however, you're in for a little bit of art, a sampling of what my writing style used to be like when I was a 10-year-old, and a little bit of knowledge, and a lot of scritching and scratching on these mission patches. If that's your cup of tea, I hope you'll stick around and enjoy it. It's the simple things, Leon. I'm sure my voice doesn't hurt, but it's the simple things. Mercury 3 was the first of the Mercury patches. This was the first of America's manned flights. May 5th, 1961, Alan Shepard flew a suborbital 15-minute mission named his capsule Freedom 7, and all Mercury missions use 7 in their capsules' names in recognition of the 7 missions. which is wrong. It's in recognition of the 7 astronauts. Shepard himself used his in recognition of the fact that his capsule was Model 7. Now, you may not notice this, but right here, I had to hand write in the number 7 over whiteout. Some of you will be too young to even know what whiteout is. This was typed. Gasp. Hello, Puff. Welcome in. Mercury 4 was launched on July 21st, 1961. It was flown by Virgil Grissom, who named the capsule Liberty Bell 7 because it was shaped like a bell. On the patch in relation to the real Liberty Bell, there is a black crack. The true Mercury 4 capsule sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean at the end of the mission. Hello, Tablish. Welcome in. As you can see, Puff, we're doing things a little differently today. A bit of art, a bit of fun, with scritching. We have a contrail. We have a black crack, as mentioned. And the capsule all in black, I think, was just meant to be cool, because black on gray with highlights of red and gold really sound like they're appealing to macho colors. Mercury 6 carried John Glenn into orbit on February 20th, 1962. This was the only mission that Glenn ever flew. He retired 2 years later and became the first astronaut to go into politics. The Mercury 6 capsule was called Friendship 7, symbolizing the importance of space exploration for the entire world. I bet you some folks are liking the sound of that tape, too. Here we go. Mercury 6, Friendship. Glenn's name is barely visible on this. It blends in so well against that baby blue of Earth that you almost can't see it or the contrails of his orbit. As an aside, this project from my youth did have an influence on me. Not only did I come to enjoy research and typing even more, but there was an extended time when I thought my likely path into a career would have taken me into aerospace engineering. That did not come to pass. Mercury 7 here is very colorful. Look at all that orange. On May 24th, 1962, Mercury 7 was launched from Cape Canaveral. Scott Carpenter was the pilot of this mission. Carpenter named his capsule Aurora 7. The Aurora overshot its Atlantic landing site by over 250 miles. This forced him to float for 3 hours before recovery ships were able to reach him. It was called Aurora because of the celestial significance. And I think that shows up well in the choice of colors. That is bright. I think I particularly like that the way this is constructed. The capsule itself is almost all in silhouette, which feels especially good against the aurora. What made me decide to go a different direction? Ultimately, that the easiest path into aerospace engineering was to join the Air Force, and I was never cut out to be a military man. I was always heavy, and I didn't like taking instruction. I also had something of a curse that comes with people who have the smarts to do well in school. I didn't need to think about my future. I just assumed I would be going on to college, and that would be that. It didn't really matter what it was. Heck, when I did actually apply to schools, while I wound up going to my state college because that was where I had full ride scholarships, I got into Harvard. I could have gone anywhere I wanted. And when I took the LSATs after graduation, I could have gone right back in and become a lawyer. But I didn't want to. Because I hadn't yet found anything that truly spoke to me. Mercury 8. Solid red border. Big, bold 8. We're almost burying the Mercury here, and they used the symbol for epsilon here for the pod, which is a little interesting. I don't know why. Maybe we'll find out in a moment. Or maybe it was because about the same time that we started this mission patch project, the Challenger blew up, and I got to watch it live on TV. That makes one I don't know, a little nervous. Maybe I should turn off my gain filter if I still have it on. Tell me if that makes a difference. Oh, I didn't even read this one. Mercury 8 carried Walter Schirra into orbit on October 3rd, 1962. The patch is apparently representing deep space. Schirra named his capsule Sigma 7 to underscore the engineering and technical aspects of spaceflight. Hello, Mithra. You caught us much earlier in the stream this time, doing fun things with a bit of art. Not that we're making art, we're playing with art. The slight hissing sound is probably the fan overhead. Hello, Teddy Bear 666. You went to a great deal of trouble to be able to use that name. I appreciate it. Kinda sick, so you're going to be lurking, just congestion, have a lot of pressure in your face. That works well. What did I end up majoring in? Well, when I first began in university, I was majoring in actuarial science, which is a specialization of statistics. Didn't stick with that very long. I switched to several different majors: Spanish, linguistics, very briefly history. The one I wound up finishing in was geography with a specialty in cartography. The creation and appreciation of maps. The final mission, Mercury 9, was flown by Gordon Cooper. It was launched on May 15th, 1963. Cooper named his capsule Faith 7 in recognition of his faith in all parts of the mission. The longest of the Mercury flights, the mission lasted 34 hours and covered 22 orbits. Mercury 9 aided in the development and success of the Apollo missions. So that ends the Mercury program. As we move into Gemini, we started to get to the point where the idea of the mission patches was somewhat planned, and they started pointing out accomplishments, if they could, or plan for accomplishments. I think you'll find that interesting in a moment. You switched 2 times, once into astrophysics from general science, then into planetary science, getting a GIS, Geographic Information Certificate, though. Yes, I'm very familiar with GIS, and reasonably familiar with planetary science and astrophysics, at least as relates from geoscience. when I toyed with the idea of going back for my postgraduate work, well, not my post-bac work, I considered a project that ultimately would have meant picking up a master's in psychology, theoretically industrial psychology, and then a doctorate in computer science to achieve an astrocartography degree. The project, keeping in mind that this was more than 20 years ago, was ultimately taken on by a wide variety of other persons working in collaboration with resources I never could have matched, and became Google Earth. Did you find that satiated your appetite after college, or were you still looking for your passion? No, I knew I was quite content with that field. I just never really managed to get started on making a career out of it. I had the great misfortune that the industry went through a paradigm shift in the software they were using and the approach that they were taking to the technology days after my graduation, which meant that my degree was obsolete before I got it home. And that meant that it took quite a while to find the first real job. Gemini was the successor to Project Mercury. Gemini spacecraft were twice the weight of the Mercury capsules and relied heavily on the technology developed during the first 6 manned flights. At the same time, Gemini craft were more advanced and complex. They bridged the gap between the end of the Mercury program and the beginnings of Apollo. Gemini provided our space program with invaluable experience in the areas of rendezvous, space docking, long-term flight capability, extravehicular activity, and self-guided re-entry. Gemini established the United States as the firm leader in the race to space, and, in particular, to the moon. So if Mercury was all about making sure that we could achieve orbit and get back down alive, Gemini was about refining all the skills we would use while in orbit. That's kind of interesting. The Gemini mission patch was the first of its kind. Alex Nagy of NASA headquarters was the first to suggest the name, and it caught on overnight. A white star on each of the 2 vertical curves of the zodiac symbol represent Pollux and Castor, the Gemini twins of the zodiac. Aptly named, Gemini missions were to always carry 2 astronauts. I like this one. It's simple. Mm-hmm. Hello, native beast. Caught up with family things and family passings. Oh, it's okay. I hope that means you are bearing up with the family passings and that life is starting to return to something that you consider normal. But it's always a pleasure to invite you back. Gemini 3 was the first manned Gemini mission. It was launched in March of 1965. It carried the first computer into space, and for the first time astronauts could control their craft in outer space. Gus Grissom and another man named Young went into controlled orbit, and they named their capsule Molly Brown, which is, I believe, the name of a song from the 60s. Buried in that is a scary thought. The Mercury astronauts didn't actually have steering. They didn't control where they were going at all. Well, this one's pretty, also simple, but I like the use of orange, both in the outer rim and in the capsule. Molly Brown. Molly B. Oh. Gemini 4, the first spacewalk. Wow. Imagine being the first person to commit to opening the door on the outer edge of an untested space capsule and just hopping out into orbit for a while. McDivitt. White. Gemini 4 lifted off from Cape Kennedy on June 3rd, 1965, and splashed down 4 days later in the Atlantic on June 7th, 1965. Jim McDivitt was forced to make manual re-entry due to a computer malfunction. Gemini 4 is particularly remembered as the first mission with an American spacewalk. Ed White was the first American to make a spacewalk. On the patch, you see the first built EVA, extravehicular activity. If it sounds like the insightful element of this history is lacking, please keep in mind, I was 10. Light and airy, Gemini 5. Cooper and Conrad, 8 days or bust. I'm guessing we're going to find out that this one was about length. I like the little wagon on it. I just do. Hello, Timmers. Gemini 5 was an 8-day mission that proved man could withstand the rigors of space for as long as it would take to fly to the moon, stay for a short time, and return to Earth. Gordon Cooper and Pete Conrad lifted off on August 21st, 1965. Their mission covered 120 orbits. This was the first mission to have a specially designed official crew patch. Mission patches were then declared to be worn on the right breast beneath the nameplate of the astronaut. From then on, astronauts chose mission emblems. This next one has an interesting shape, being a hexagon. But not very interesting colors. I mean, silver on black. Pretty basic. GTA 6, Shearer and Stafford. Gemini 6 was launched 11 days after Gemini 7, leaving the pad at Cape Kennedy on December 15, 1965. The crew consisted of Mercury 8 veteran Wally Schirra and Thomas Stafford. After 3 delays, Gemini 6 joined Gemini 7 in orbit, and they orbited the Earth together for nearly a full day. They came within 6 feet of each other. On the patch, you see the rendezvous site and the Agenda satellite, the original target. Gemini 7 had to replace Agena as a target because of a Agena malfunction. Oh, I see. So this is effectively our contact point, and it was supposed to be an intercept with a satellite, but instead became an intercept with a second capsule because, well, equipment failure. The stars form G6. The stars follow the path of the 6. I can't say that they form a G specifically. But how you interpret art is entirely up to you. Bye-bye. Hello, game player. How are you today? Borman Lovell. B. Here we have what looks like the Olympic torch, taking prominence away from the capsule. What do we think they were celebrating here? Space. Gemini 7 launched on December, what I typed was Dedember 4th, 1965, carrying Frank Borman and James Lovell into orbit. Its main objectives were to perform medical experiments and to further study man's limits of endurance in a deep space environment. Gemini 7 also became the rendezvous for Gemini 6 when that mission's Agena target rocket failed to achieve orbit. On the patch, the torch signifies medicine and endurance in the tradition of a long-distance runner. The mission included 240 orbits, which is twice the time necessary to travel to the moon and back. Since that's our Dracula ASMR timer popping up, I will point out his GoFundMe is still going strong. I hope anyone who has the means will consider contributing to it to help one of our own get back on their feet. But it occurs to me that I have no way of knowing if you did that, so if you have chosen to contribute, let me know so that I can call you out for your kindness. Now, this one's interesting. This should be Gemini 8, and based on its colors, it's practically a pride flag. In the 60s, I kinda doubt that's what it was supposed to represent, but I wonder if this one is particularly popular for that reason. Armstrong. Scott. 1, 2, 3. Hello, Jagudo. Welcome. Again, I think it's pretty. Gemini 8. Neil Armstrong and David Scott flew into orbit in Gemini 8 on March 16, 1966. Almost 11 hours later, they were forced to make an emergency splashdown off the coast of Florida. Gemini 8 became the first space emergency, but not before it completed the first successful docking maneuver in the history of spaceflight. On the patch, there is a prism splitting the light of Pollux and Castor into the zodiac symbol for Gemini. Gemini 8's main objectives combined all of the Gemini objectives: EVA, experiments, rendezvous, and docking. This one's actually pinned to the page, so I won't remove it, but is it just me, or could you easily think that was like a Raiders patch? Gemini 9, the unlucky flight, was piloted by Elliot C. and Charles Bassett II. At least, they were supposed to. But they were killed in a plane crash in St. Louis. They crashed in the McDonald area. They crashed in the McDonald they were flying, only yards from where their capsule was being built. Thomas Stafford and Eugene Cernan, the backup crew, took over instead. After 2 delays, they took off on June 3, 1966. The Agena target fiberglass cover was jammed, preventing docking. In the mission, there was a 2-hour spacewalk. This patch is shield-shaped unlike any other patch, and shows the common position of the Gemini Agena docking profile. That's kind of cool. Gemini 10 took off from Cape Kennedy on July 18, 1966, taking with it John Young and Michael Collins. Gemini 10 achieved several notable accomplishments. They included a perfect docking with the Agena target, a new orbital altitude record, and successful docking with Gemini 8's Agena, with a spacewalk to the Agena retrieving scientific equipment which was returned to Earth. The chase sequence on the patch represents the twin rendezvous of the 2 targets. There we go. Now you can see the orbital paths. Young. Collins. Even by the standards of one of our more unusual streams, chat seems quiet tonight. Are you hypnotized by the scratching and the paper sounds? Soothed by the voice? Drifting off to sleep? Or bored? Aw, thank you, Iffy. Or sorry, I Fly Ice Gold. I appreciate that. I'd like to say it is unique. I certainly don't think I have seen any other patch tracing videos on Twitch. Aw, thank you, Zenit. Listening while playing a game on another phone, but you're enjoying it. Okay, works for me. Still here, just very relaxed after a stressful week. Alright, so it is zoned out and relaxed. This works for me. Okay. This one is kind of curious. Shaped like an arrow. Or at least another type of shield. Conrad and Gordon. All right. Conrad and Gordon. Learning a lot, and you work at the Space Center? Well then, why don't you have this collection of patches, I Fly Ice Cold? I've looked into it. They're still available for sale, complete with the ones that were made after I stopped. You could do it. You could do it. Or you could get me a really good deal maybe on expanding and finishing the collection. On September 12th, 1966, Gemini 11 lifted off from Cape Kennedy and wouldn't return until September 15th. Gemini 11 smashed 10's altitude record by a long way when Pete Conrad and Rich Gordon Jr. flew her to 850 miles. This was important because such maneuvering abilities would be necessary for any successful attempts to visit the moon. There were several new things that took place on this mission. These include things such as double spacewalks, a cartwheel motion marking the first attempt at artificial gravity in history, and completely computer-controlled re-entry attempts. It was successful. The patch was chosen by the pilots to have the colors navy blue and gold because they were both in the Navy at one time, and these are the Navy colors. Each of the 4 white stars in the patch symbolizes a particular event of the mission. The first, closest to Earth, right there, symbolizes the first orbit rendezvous with the target vehicle. The second, Gemini Agena located, symbolizes the docking. The third, right under the tether, represents Gordon's spacewalk. At the top, a fourth star represents the 850-mile orbital record achieved by the two spacecraft. From the perspective of heraldry, there is a lot going on in that patch. I am impressed. You have a few Lockheed patches and mission coins, but nothing compared to my collection. Well, you can if you want. At least the last time I checked, getting roughly the collection that I have here would, assuming that you're just going with the souvenir patches, cost about $150. So you can do it if you want to. Gemini 12, the last mission of the Gemini series, rocketed away on November 11, 1966. The crew consisted of Jim Lovell and Edwin Buzz Aldrin, Jr. Aldrin was to perform 3 separate spacewalks. This was the longest duration EVA up to this point. It did several other things, too. These include 3 Agena rendezvous, artificial gravity experiments, a fully automatic re-entry with computer guidance, ending one of the most trouble-free missions in the highly successful Gemini series. Gemini 12 has Halloween colors, orange, gold, and black, because it launched near Halloween, and the crew wanted to emphasize this. The patch capsule is pointing like the hand of a clock towards the Roman numeral 12, the witching hour. It's a pretty one. Lovell and Aldrin. X. When the space shuttle program ended, I seriously thought about catching up on the last of my collection, just so I would have them all. But now that U.S. spaceflight is becoming a thing again, I would have to get patches for the Ares missions and the Artemis missions, and yeah, I probably will be doing that at some point. Perhaps our friend from the Space Center will know better than I, because I'm not super versed on this, but I believe Ares is for manned travel to Mars, and Artemis is return to the moon. Non-cooperative page. All right. Now we're getting into Apollo, the ones that tended to capture the imagination of so many. The Apollo program has become, for many Americans, the high watermark of the American space program. Even the splendor and excitement of the space shuttle has not captured the imagination and spirit of the American public in the way Apollo did. There was something magical and special about those days when we raced to be the first men on the moon. Americans were to truly become the first interplanetary travelers in Earth's history. Science fiction was rapidly becoming science fact, and as our successes grew, many of us dreamed of colonies in space and brave new worlds waiting to be explored. Books, movies, and even television shows urged us all to boldly go where no man has gone before. Apollo became more than just an American dream. Television brought coverage of NASA's ambitious undertaking to all the people of the world. The Earth's inhabitants waited expectantly for each launch and marveled at the immensity of the task. To leave the bonds of Earth and travel to her moon was the boldest undertaking of this generation. Man learned to fly early in the century. Now, near its end, it was reaching beyond boundaries that had seemed impassable. Apollo's three-man spacecraft was first proposed by NASA in July of 1960. The spaceship would be designed for Earth orbital and circumlunar flights and would be launched by a Saturn I type rocket. Hello, I'm Sevda. Welcome in. Is that Picard doing a happy dance? I can't quite tell. Now, the Apollo mission patch, that's looking sharp. Now we've got patches within patches and color within color. That's looking good. The moon, the earth, a slingshot path. The Apollo program patch is often called Apollo A because of the large stylized A which can be seen in the center of the patch. On the patch you can, if you study hard, see the constellation Orion, the 3 stars of his belt, the bow, the man, his legs. That was not in frame. The 3 stars of the belt, the bow, the man, his legs. Now this one, has very special meaning. Not specifically to me, but I can already tell the special meaning in the heraldry. Because here we have white, Grissom, for Grissom. Grissom has already appeared on several of these patches. He's a vet. CHAFFE, Chaffee, APOLLO1. And we have a more ornate Earth. And a lovely pod, and a distant moon. But what really makes it stand out is the obvious hints of the American flag. And do we know why there might be an American flag on here? Can anyone guess? After all, they're all American launches. Why this one in particular? I bet our friend from the Space Center knows. Apollo 1 never got off the ground. On January 26, 1967, the capsule was being ground tested on Launch Pad 34. The astronauts, Ed White, Gus Grissom, and Roger Chaffee, were running a plugs-out test, and when they were inside, after hours of scheduled radio silence, they cried out that there was fire on board. Before they could be rescued, they died of asphyxia. Because of this accident, the entire space program was held up for 18 months. And there is no Apollo 2 through 6 as a manned mission. So the flag is for the same reason that you see it in a soldier's, or draped over a soldier's coffin. They gave their lives for the country. And when I said that it captured the imagination, Apollo, Gemini had been so spectacularly successful, and here the first Apollo mission, death. As horrible as it is to consider, I'm sure that got people engaged. I'm willing to do fire, Puff, but I'm going to hold off a few minutes because turning on fire right after mentioning people who died of asphyxia in a ground fire feels very crass. I like the shape of this one. They start to become more ornate with Apollo. This is for Apollo 7. From Shira, another vet. Isil. And Cunningham. This entire evening, soft talking, screeching, tracing, and tape. And it works pretty darn well, I think. Apollo 7 carried both the command and service, but did not carry a lunar module. The mission lifted off on October 11, 1968, carrying astronauts Walter Schirra and Don Eisel and Walter Cunningham. It contained highly successful tests of operational qualities of the Apollo hardware. Apollo 7 also broadcast the first live television transmissions from a manned spacecraft. They all spent more time up than all missions combined from the USSR. So that would be kind of the flipping the bird to counterparts in the Cold War. I didn't finish the reading on the A patch. On the patch, you can, if you study hard, see the constellation Orion. Within him, you should see the following stars: Mintak, Alnilam, Almatak, Betelgeuse, Bellatrix, Saiph, and Rigel. Rigel is a navigation star used by the astronauts. By this point in the project, I was finding that I needed to devote more space on each page to the patches and had less space to write. Challenge! This one seems very straightforward. Good old infinity symbol 8 for Borman, Lovell, and Anders. I did not know that, Timmers. And it being Nova, the blast should be visible for weeks, so that will be interesting. Apollo 8 launched from Cape Kennedy on December 21st, 1968. Her crew included Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, Bill Anders. This was the first mission to the moon. It orbited the moon 10 times. They obtained film and photographs of both the close and far sides. Borman also took the now famous picture Earthrise. The mission ended with Pacific splashdown only 11 seconds before the scheduled time, which had been made many months beforehand. The crew wanted to name the capsule Columbia, but the idea was rejected. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that's where Earthrise came from, but it is a very famous picture. Well, this is true too, Timmers. Whatever happened with Betelgeuse happened a long time ago. If it's 10,000 light years away, mankind might have discovered fire. Maybe. Apollo 9 took off from the Cape on March 3, 1969, carrying James McDivitt, Russell Schweickart, and David Scott. This was the first manned mission to carry the lunar module. On this mission, the LEM was tested in disengaging procedures in midair. The LEM spread to 150 miles from the module. So this was about docking and undocking. On some level, I very much appreciate that each of these was testing something more. McDivitt. We've seen that name before. Scott. Well, first one to actually show the Atlas rocket on there. Now they're getting complicated. Wow. So we have S-T-A-F-O-R-D, Stafford, Young, and Gernon. Apollo 10. Fire. Apollo 10 lifted off from the Cape on May 18th, 1969. The crew included Tom Stafford, John Young, Eugene Cernan. Apollo 10's Charlie Brown section of the LEM would be in the mission stay in orbit, while the Snoopy probe descended to 50,000 feet above the moon. The mission firsts were a dress rehearsal, lunar orbit with the module, color TV broadcasts. This mission marked almost definite success on landing on the moon. And I have no doubt whatsoever that we now arrive at the most popular of the patches in this series. These are both for Apollo 11. This is the commemorative patch. This is the actual mission patch. And I notice it has no names on it. That's interesting. But isn't that pretty? Apollo 11. It's awfully close to the presidential seal in its colors and styling. Birdie, yes indeed, the eagle has landed. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. All very familiar things related to it. And hello, half-herd, welcome in. July 16, 1969, Wednesday. Over 1 million people lined the causeway at Cape Kennedy. The streets were jammed in towns of Cocoa Beach and Titusville. Millions more watched their television screens as first smoke and flame, then the roar tell them that Apollo 11 is on its way. Every eye turned skyward, following the trail of the mighty Saturn as it blazed through Florida's morning sky. On Sunday, July 20th, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin separate the lunar module Eagle from the command module Columbia, fire her descent engine, and begin final approach to the moon's surface. They landed in the Sea of Tranquility. The landing was nearly aborted. Continual malfunction alarms were being called out by Aldrin and were confirmed by Mission Control. They indicated that one of the LEM's computers was overloading. Without the radar system controlled by the computer, they could easily crash. After the mission, Steve Bales was awarded the Medal of Freedom for keeping a cool head and not aborting the mission. At 4:17 p.m., the words, "The Eagle has landed," echoed across the nation, spoken by Neil Armstrong. At 10:56 p.m., Sunday, July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong said quietly, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." In the mission, there was a total of 950,000 miles traveled. The astronauts were kept isolated for 21 days afterward because of possible contamination. On the Apollo 11 commemorative patch, you see an astronaut to the right of the LEM unit. This astronaut is holding a flag because one of the first things the astronauts Aldrin and Armstrong did was to plant a flag, and obviously a flag symbolizes the planting of a flag. This is a good patch too. I mean, colorful, memorable, but again, no names. First lunar landing of mankind, 1969. United States of America, and not only does it have the flag and the lander, it even has the footsteps on the moon. Hello, hello, Huntress. How are you today? Ack! The tape failed. How dare it? Silly tape. Turns out that shoving crinkly paper back into warped sleeves, not the easiest thing in the world. Apollo 11. And the next few really got stylized. And they are just, in my opinion, lovely works of art. For Apollo 12, we see a return of names, but now the command module has been replaced with a galleon puttering through space. Isn't that cute? C-O-N-R-A-D-D-O-N. Apollo 12. I also like the porthole effect of having the gold field. Hello, Ace Tier TTV. Welcome. Hello, Fuzzmaster. It's nice to see you. Oh, that's very kind. You're always welcome to lurk, but it is appreciated when you pipe up every now and then. That's how I get to know more people. So who here thinks it's fitting that we're reviewing the space program when I have promised that next week, assuming the book arrives on time, we'll be starting Dune? Of course, Fuzzmaster. It's always wonderful to have you pop in. Apollo 12 left on November 14th, 1969, carrying with it Pete Conrad, Dick Gordon, and Al Bean. The command module was called the Yankee Clipper, and the lunar module was called the Intrepid. As the Apollo 12 Saturn V rocket rose skyward during a storm, it was struck by lightning. This caused a brief malfunction of the systems, almost causing the first NASA launch abort. They landed near the unmanned lunar probe, the Surveyor 3, recovering its TV camera. They also got moon rocks and soil samples, and launched the first ALSEP. The ship on the patch equals the command module. The spice must flow. Isn't this one lovely? A trio of horses racing away from the sun into space. Aw, Fuzzmaster, that was very kind of you, sharing those gift subs with so many friends. I hope that Dreadly and Ice Truck and A New Thing and It's Breezy and Irish Armstrong are all going to enjoy the emotes. But that was super kind. Lovely moon, lovely path into space, lovely sun. Now, what have we already noticed on this patch? No names, but a motto. The first mission with a motto, Ex Luna Scientia. I believe that's to the moon for science. I don't actually know the Latin. This one's also quite famous. Many of you will have seen the movie. And also, Fuzzmaster, for so many gift subs, you get the ominous belly bump. Belly bump. Bump, 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 bump. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Oh, bump. Apollo 13 carried James Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes into space on April 11, 1970. They were about 200,000 miles out when trouble began. An explosion ruptured an oxygen tank and it was leaking into space. They abandoned the command module and took refuge in the lunar module. Ground crews searched for ways for them to return safely. They slingshotted the moon, jettisoned all but the command module, took pictures of the half-gone service module, and came down as the first space rescue mission. Snorlax is cool. And in case you did not realize, this is Snorlax with his cute little Japanese tags, because I bought him from the Pokemon Center in Kyoto. From the moon knowledge. Okay, even better. Timmers looked it up. Now this one, possibly because of all the browns in the tone, reminds me of a belt buckle. You may not see it, you may disagree, but it reminds me of a belt buckle. Apollo 14, Shepard, Rowan, Mitchell, January 31st, 1971. Apollo 14 zoomed away with Alan Shepard, Stuart Roosa, and Ed Mitchell aboard. Their worst nightmare almost came true. The command module separated from the LEM, reversed, and prepared to dock. After 5 tries, they finally docked. Again, the landing was nearly aborted due to malfunction. On the moon, 2 EVAs were performed, along with several experiments and the collection of 95 pounds in moon rocks. On the way back, they performed ESP experiments. I wonder what the ESP references here. This was the last mission needing decontamination. This mission also had a great backup crew patch, but I don't seem to have that one. Go back in. We will convince it. Were they, Timmers? Okay. Why not study it? This one makes me think that it may, ever so subtly, have inspired the Nike swoosh. Or maybe that's the Reebok swoosh? I don't remember my swooshes. And the background, the whole background, is the moon. That's kind of nifty. American colors. But compared to some of the patches we've just seen, relatively simple and plain. Apollo 15 carried away Dave Scott, Al Worden, and Jim Irwin on July 26, 1971. This was the first mission to use the lunar rover. All experiments and such in the mission went as hoped. The service module did several things during the mission: mapped the moon's surface, took panoramic photography, monitored solar X-ray interaction and particle emissions, and ejected sub-satellite into lunar orbit for future moon studies. They found what is now dubbed the Genesis Rock. It happens to be 4,150,000,000 years old. April 16, 1972 took John Young, Ken Mattingly, and Charles Duke off to a rocky start with Apollo 16. During this mission, there was a lunar rover, one car Grand Prix, as well as 3 EVAs and a first in splashdown history. The capsule floated upside down when it landed. The eagle and shield on the patch symbolize the United States. The gold vector symbolizes NASA and spaceflight. Nothing about what I just read tells me why this one is so full of political symbolism. Apollo 16, Young, Mattingly, Duke. The stars, the stripes, the swoosh. It's pretty, but why was this one so full of that symbolism? This one immediately interests me because after several where the mission number was just numbers, we've gone back to Roman numerals, and we see the first, and as far as I recall, only instance in Apollo of actually showing an image of Apollo. And the eagle with the American flag in it almost looks like the post office symbol. Schmidt. Who knows, maybe that means somebody left a letter on the moon. Apollo 17 shot off from Cape Kennedy on December 6, 1972. Gene Cernan, Ron Evans, and Jack Schmidt consisted of the crew. Apollo 17 stayed longer, traveled farther, and brought back more lunar samples than any other mission. It was the first manned night launch. They unloaded ALSEP packages, performed heat flow experiments, and made extensive use of the Land Rover. Apollo on the patch represents NASA's Apollo program. It's in gold to symbolize the golden age of space. The eagle wings represent man's first encounter with the celestial body, the moon. And that was the last of the Apollo missions. Maybe that's why they were becoming more politically symbolic. The mystique was over, and now they're becoming workhorse missions. Skylab was America's first space station. For the first time in our space program, astronauts had an environment suitable for extended habitation in the hazardous environs of outer space. A major goal of Skylab was to study the physical effects caused by flights of long duration. Other goals included studies of solar activity without the interference of Earth's atmosphere, and the study of Earth itself from the vantage point of Earth orbit. Earth studies were to concentrate on natural resources, pollution problems, and natural disasters such as floods, storms, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. Are we interested in the Skylab history? It's not a very popularized portion of the space program. We don't have to do it. There's plenty more to come. What are your thoughts? Well, one of the main things they found, Fuzzmaster Elite, is that they couldn't keep the space station in orbit all that terribly long. There were only 4 missions, and then Skylab burned up. But let's go through it. That's pretty. Shows the space station in some detail. The sun, because they were supposed to be, well, studying the sun and the Earth at the same time. Well-named program. I like that aspect of it. Skylab. United States. The Skylab program patch is commonly known as Skylab USA. It represents the Skylab program, which is mainly meant to be a habitational environment for the astronauts' space station. Skylab itself was launched on May 14, 1973. Skylab, in the beginning, lost its thermal shield. Because of this, temperatures soared. Their only source of power, because the solar wing that they still had was jammed, was the Apollo telescope mount. Eventually, Skylab was repaired, and the 3 missions and crews could be done. I said 4. I did not realize this was a program patch. One of the other things I'm enjoying about this particular evenings of content, many of my triggers are based around just taking things that I have in my personal possession, which are a little exotic and curious, and using them in fun ways. Would you have randomly assumed I had a collection of space patches laying around? Probably not, but I did. And whatever else we might say about the Skylab program, this patch is beautiful. Even if it does imply that it's hurtling towards the Earth in a giant fiery descent. Oh, la banana roofie. Skylab 1. Conrad. Kerwin. Whites. Bean, Garrison, Garriott, and Lusma. Skylab 2. And here we have the Vitruvian Man set against U.S. colors. Okay, we were talking about the political symbolism of the last of the Apollo patches, but the Vitruvian Man set against an Earth that's made to look like it's all the United States? Yeah, okay. It's also interesting that this is the third font from the 3 patches in Skylab series. The first one, it's a typical non-curling anti-aliased font. Skylab 1 looks like a bold version of Comic Sans, and this one, I mean, I mentioned before we had a patch that looked like a Raiders logo. This one, to me, feels like it could absolutely be NBA. Yes, there were Apollo missions, but you just missed them. Skylab was the next program after Apollo. The Skylab 2 mission was launched on July 28, 1973, with a crew of Al Bean, Owen Garriott, and Jack Lusma. All 3 developed space sickness due to weightlessness. They were almost stranded due to a rupture in one of the command module's thrusters. The astronauts were able to complete their experiments, which included a sun shield, observations of test animals in weightlessness, the testing of the AMUs for use in future spacewalks, and the taking of 75,000 sun pictures, with pictures and tapes of 26 EREP orbits. 75,000 pictures of the sun. You're not supposed to point your camera at the sun. I'll betcha they got a lecture later. I'm kidding. Oh yes, you are correct, but that program is not labeled Apollo. It is labeled Artemis. I'm not going to pull out this last Skylab one, but it is pretty. And hey, we have a rainbow again. Another new font, and a tree for some reason. 6 days late, Skylab 3 was launched on November 16, 1973. It lifted off with Gerald Carr, Dr. Ed Gibson, and William Pogue. Its main objectives included observation of the comet Kohutek and taking pictures of its changing composition as it became heated by the sun. Skylab 3 was the final mission. After Russia's Soyuz 13 docked and undocked with Skylab, its orbit decayed, and it disintegrated in the atmosphere on July 1st, 1979. Oh, probably, Fuzzmaster. But a tree? The other symbol looks very much like hydrogen atom, so I can certainly believe that's science in general. And, I mean, the whole thing was about the sun and the weather, so I can see rainbows. But a tree? I just don't see how the tree relates. The hydrogen symbol could also be the comet. Could be. On May 24, 1972, plans for a joint American-Soviet mission were signed by President Nixon and Soviet leader Kosygin. The first launch for this program was set for July 15, 1975. The average crew age was 45, and the U.S. crew consisted of Tom Stafford, Deke Slayton, and Vance Brand. The Soviet team consisted of Alexei Leonov, Valery Kubasov. The ASTP was one of several programs to face serious financial problems. This was due to the fact that at the end of the Apollo program, the U.S.'s interest in spaceflight had begun waning. In orbit, the two countries' modules were to interface, so the launch was one of the most complex in history. This was due to the fact that the Apollo rocket in Florida and the Soyuz rocket in Russia had to launch at exactly the same instant, or else they would dock wrong and probably destroy each other. No, I turned off X marks the spot for the evening. These patches are 40-year-old collectibles. I do not feel like even approaching them with sticky sand. The Apollo-Soyuz program had a crew patch designed by the Americans. During pre-mission training, the cosmonauts saw the design and agreed that it would be the crew patch for the mission. In the center of the patch, the two modules are depicted in the procedure of docking. The 3 stars in the blue represent astronauts, and the 2 in red, the cosmonauts. Isn't that pretty? Here's the 3 stars in blue, the 2 stars in red, the modules merging, the sun, the earth. This is the entire Apollo-Soyuz program. So, let's move on to something that feels a little more modern. These were purchased by my father when I was 10. And they're still publicly available. You can purchase patches like these directly from the Space Center. Some of you will have already known this, but the first shuttle was named Enterprise, and it never flew a mission. Approach and landing test. Angle truly ice. I believe the Enterprise, when the shuttle commission was decommissioned, or shuttle program was decommissioned, I believe the Enterprise wound up at the Air and Space Museum in Seattle. But I could be wrong. Almost no one has redeemed anything. Everyone's clearly enjoying this too much. That works. A name trace. Spoke too soon, Dragon. Spoke too soon. Fuzzmaster, it was a pleasure having you. If you want to check out the rest of these, pop back in for the VOD at some point. I may also have to... This might be one of those rare instances where I just take the VOD and put it up on YouTube unmodified, because I suspect this one will be unique enough to catch some interest. What's VOD? On Twitch, any live stream is automatically recorded and retained for a certain period of time, so it can be used in reruns, things of that nature. When you are an affiliate, they are only saved for a couple of weeks. When you are a partner, they can be saved for many months, or ultimately saved forever. I have not been recording the stream specifically, but there's no reason really why I couldn't download it and forwarding it on over to YouTube. Poor Dragon Mike. The approach and landing test program began in 1977. NASA wanted to call the first shuttle the Constitution. However, 10,000 Star Trek fans wrote to President Ford to get it named the Enterprise. This caused NASA international embarrassment because the Enterprise was never to go into orbit. Enterprise then became the ground test vehicle after the ALT program had been completed. See you soon, Banana Roofie. Classic Space Shuttle patch. This one, many of us will have seen in our lifetime on uniforms. The conception of reusable space vehicles was first proposed in the 1970s. The X-15 rocket plane was the granddaddy of the space shuttle. Shuttle orbiters are just over 120 feet long and nearly 57 feet tall. They have a wingspan of 78 feet. Originally, 5 shuttles were scheduled to be built. However, due to budget problems, they were limited to 4. The first of the operational shuttles was the Columbia. After that came the Challenger, the Discovery, and the Atlantis. I don't recall if the Endeavour had come into existence by the time I finished this project, but at least as of this writing, there were 4. The insignia on the program patch represents the entire space transportation system. This one's pretty. I like it. Shape is unique, has fire and earth and space, the full shuttle and an orbit. I like it quite a bit. And it's the Columbia. With Young and Crippen commanding. STS-1 was the first launching of the Columbia. The launch, I typed launch, but the launch was scheduled for April 10th, 1981, but was delayed for 48 hours due to computer problems. Ah, Distel's place. Well, welcome in, my D&D brother. How are you doing today? Hello, Gonkus and Murphberg in Distel's place. It's a pleasure to have you all here. We're doing our thing with a little bit of ASMR again tonight. Tonight we're actually even toning that down and talking about the history of the space program through space patches that we are tapping and scratching on and reading about at the same time. We are definitely doing good, Distels. I have not gotten a chance to pop into your ongoing streams recently. How are you holding up with all the fireball? Hello, Murphberg, and welcome, Pixelated Bunny. If we couldn't get a shout-out for Distel's place, when we were still running Cozy D&D, they were our strongest supporter amongst the D&D community, always tried to show up and support us, and they run quite a few really engaging streams themselves. I just pity the poor man's liver. Well, thank you, Dragon Mike, for doing it again. STS-1 was the first launching of the Columbia. The launch was scheduled for April 10th, 1981, but was delayed for 48 hours due to computer problems. It eventually took off on the 20th anniversary of the first manned spaceflight. Columbia carried 2 astronauts on her maiden flight, John Young and Bob Crippen. Re-entry procedures for the Columbia were started in the 36th orbit just 53 hours into the mission. Entry interface began at 400,000 feet at a speed of Mach 25. It passed the U.S. coastline at Mach 6, 150,000 feet up. It touched down at Edward Air Force Base Dry Lake Bed on April 14th. Hello, Byzantine Red. Distel, whenever anyone raids, I like to offer them a free trigger. I know ASMR isn't your thing per se, but is there anything you would like me to do for you, my friend? Columbia, Engel, truly. You may also be amused by a concept that I've been mulling over for another D&D campaign. I'm thinking of starting one in which, to avoid the trope of starting in a bar, and to avoid the inevitability of weak backstories, I'm going to start, let's call it in media res, in somebody's adventuring career, with every party member having already fallen afoul of one or more hags. And I will introduce strange elements to their character. Perhaps their hands are now made of wood, or they have a face of a snake, or something like that. And I will supply them with inspiration if they can improvise for me a reason why these things are, and then come up with family and friends that they want to try and catch back up with after having been imprisoned for decades and only recently rescued. Yes, that's right, it's a prison break, except that they'll already have broken out and now they're free to do what they wish. I think that sounds fun. STS-2 took off on November 12th, 1981. Her crew consisted of Joe Engel and Richard Truly. 4 delays had brought the launch to this date, the most serious of which was a fuel spill which destroyed several hundred heat-resistant tiles. 8 minutes into flight, trouble began. Their engine speed was below what it should be. One of its 3 fuel cells was malfunctioning. That fuel cell was later shut down. With only 2/3 of its fuel left, it risked the launch of Osta-1. One of the first satellite launches into orbit from the shuttle. I'm guessing the distil ran off immediately because they sometimes do that. But they really are good folks. And Pixelated Bunny, if you're still here, how have your streams been going? Here's another pretty one. I see the arms open for satellite deployment. It's a much more detailed shuttle. Fullerton, Columbia. Now we come to the first patch, I think, in the entire series that I just actively don't like. Something about this patch, despite its red, white, and blue to once again show the patriotic theme, feels not only boring, but I'm reminded of, like, FedEx or UPS. It feels like it's just lame. Mattingly and Hartsfield. Well, we are entitled to have different opinions. If you like it, then great. Logo for a car parts store. Yeah, I could kind of see that for like Napa. I don't know, just something about it rubs me the wrong way. STS-3 was the 3rd mission with the orbiter Columbia. Its crew were both veterans of the program, namely Jack Loosma and Gordon Fullerton. Columbia lifted off on March 22nd, 1982. Probably the most significant achievement of STS-3 was the successful use of the Remote Manipulator System, or Shuttle Arm. Due to bad weather at Edwards Air Force Base, STS-3 was forced to set down at White Sands, New Mexico. However, 39 minutes before landing, they were given a 24-hour wave-off due to high winds at White Sands. Afterwards, they did successfully land on March 30th. STS-4 was the final mission of the test flight series. Columbia lifted off on June 27, 1982, carrying Ken Mattingly and Henry Hartsfield. The accomplishments of STS-4 included the carrying of the first Department of Defense payload, the cryogenic infrared radiance telescope, into space. It also included the carrying of the first commercial concern payload into space, the continuous flow electrophoresis system. STS-4 also carried the first Getaway Special. These are scientific experiments which are shuttle flown on a space-available basis. They are available to industry, educational organizations, and governments with a legitimate scientific experiment. STS-4 was the most trouble-free of the first 4 missions, with only 16 minor problems. Re-entry went smoothly, and Columbia touched down at Edwards Air Force Base. Maybe that's why its patch doesn't wow me. It didn't have anything of real consequence. It didn't have failures. It didn't have lots of cool aspects to it. I don't know. Or I could just dislike it. Tie-dye peacock jasmine. Welcome in. Welcome, and thank you for bringing your friends. It is a pleasure to have you here. Haven't seen you in a little bit. Are things going smoothly for you? Giganto greets you with aplomb. Bunk, 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 bunk. Hello, Plinky Platoon. Enjoy your lurkitude. Tie-dye peacock. Today we're doing something a little unusual. We are playing with space patches, meaning mission patches from the NASA space program, and reading through various bits of historical research that I did for these back when I was 10. So you get to learn a little bit what I was like as a writer at that time. Been busy in real life, so not as much stream. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm glad life is good. Maintaining that balance is always important. Whenever someone raids, though, we do like to offer them a free trigger. Is there anything you would like me to do for you or your friends? I like this one for the great big star. Though nowadays it would just immediately be assumed to be Captain America. And the launching of the satellites is pretty cool too. Wooden bowl? Sure, we can play around with the wooden bowl. Thank you, Shoddy Bees. Do you mean the bowl Or the patches, or both. Welcome back, Kathy. What's wrong with your ears, Dragon Mike? No, it wasn't that loud. I just have the gain turned up. There is no queue at the moment. At present, folks are mostly fixated enough on the patch play that we are doing that they have not been redeeming much. No worries, Fried Caffeine. You're still entitled to redeem whatever you want. It just means there isn't much of a queue because people haven't been redeeming tonight. Well, that would be a huge waste of points then, Dragon Mike. Eating baking soda or powder. I can see that sound coming through with that particular trigger. Yeah. We call it wood warping sometimes. It's literally just the sound of the finger pads catching on the wood and then releasing when I apply pressure. And X marks the spot is not available because these patches are 40-year-old cloth collector's items. I am not going to play with sticky sand near them. Hello, Nile Banana. I've been good. How about yourself? We recently got back from a visit to Japan, had a wonderful time with that. We're enjoying some off-brand content, just playing with things like these space patches in anticipation for our next book. Yeah. Next week, assuming the book arrives on time, we are going to break our usual rule of staying with public domain material and just do Dune. And we'll see how well that goes. What did I do in Japan? I based out of Kyoto and spent a better part of a week exploring temples and shrines and castles and chasing cherry blossoms. enjoyed an onsen, learned the pleasures of ramen, shopped in strange places in which it was possible to get lost in the store. Then I hopped down to Nara to play with the deer, and Hiroshima for an intentional and much sought out, emotionally conflicting experience of meditating in a place with its unique history. Just dried out your wallet buying stuff for the motorcycle. Well, that could be a good thing. It was a lovely trip. I took away a lot of strong memories from it. And recorded a few videos and showed off a bunch of pictures. Tonight we're not doing that, but we'll continue to do so in the future. We try to include the streams, at least somewhat, in all of our wanderings. And pretty soon I have to get serious about planning the next one by picking a destination in Africa. Niall, just no. No. Just no. I do realize, though, that I had a redemption from at least an hour ago that I never did. I never gave Puff Bigsby his ambient noise, so at this point, even if he's still here and still wants it, I'm refunding the points. There is actually some of that tone in the memorials themselves. There is a clock called the atomic bomb clock that oversees the park that was made out of Ground Zero. And this clock, the main clock face is actually a sphere with the clock on 3 sides, shaped to look like the core of an atomic bomb. The rest of the clock structure is shaped to resemble a gantry such as is used in an atomic bomb test, and the gantry itself is warped and mangled at the bottom to suggest rubble and ruin. And this looms over the entire site. Some artist was really on point. Take care, Fried Caffeine. Take care. The Peace Clock Tower? Yeah. It is interesting. I'm glad I saw it. But it is very on point. STF-5 lifted off from Cape Kennedy on November 11, 1982. Columbia carried Dr. William Lenoir, Dr. Joe Allen, Vance Brand, and Robert Overmyer into space, beginning the first operational shuttle flight. STS-5 achieved many firsts, such as the first launching of a commercial satellite, the first photographs taken during landing operations, and the first 4-man crew in history. 2 satellites were launched from Columbia, as well as 3 getaway specials. The satellites that were launched were the Business Systems SBS-3 and Canada's Anik C-3. Landing went well as Columbia came in at Mach 0.97 and set down at Edwards Air Force Base with only one problem. This problem was that the inboard wheel locked and caused some steering difficulties. STS-6 lifted off on April 5, 1983, after several postponements, and carried Paul Weitz, Carol Bobko, Donald Peterson, and Dr. Story Musgrave into orbit. This crew was nicknamed the Geritol crew because their average age was 47. STS-6 performed the EVA projects that could not be performed on STS-5 and launched the first of 3 tracking and data relay satellites, also known as the TDRS. It was powered by the inertial upper stage system called the IUS, designed by the Air Force. Challenger then ended its first mission by landing at Edwards Air Force Base on April 10, 1983, with no problems. Spoiler warning. They won't all go so smoothly. Challenger. Bob Go. Musgrave. Peterson. Whites. STS 6. Now this one, despite having exactly the same color palette as the one I said I didn't like earlier, appeals more to me because it actually shows something that took place in the mission. Something. This one does not want to come loose, so we'll just play with it on the paper. Challenger. Thaggard. Ride. Hauk. Fabian. Grippin. It would be funny, you're right. STS-7 launched as the Challenger carried Bob Crippen, Frederick Hauk, John Fabian, Dr. Norman Thaggart, and Dr. Sally Ride into orbit. Sally Ride also had the honor of being the first woman in space. STS-7 also contained the youngest astronaut to this date. STS-7 launched 2 commercial satellites, the Canada's NXC and Indonesia's Palapa B. In addition, it first used the SPS, or Shuttle Pallet System. STS-7 even carried 7 getaway specials in the first U.S.-German scientific satellite. This satellite, the OSTA-2, or Office of Space and Terrestrial Applications, now known as the Office of Space Science and Applications. Last but not least, it carried the McDonnell Douglas CFES electrophoresis experiment. To end the mission, Challenger set down at Edwards. We are seeing a tendency towards being workhorses with the shuttle missions, but that is the very nature of the shuttle. They are, in many respects, a delivery crew. Hello, Conkus Bonkus. An incredibly impressive delivery crew in what they are capable of, but, I mean, they are meant to hop up to orbit, put stuff there, and come back. Now this one is a return to the pretty. I love that the main booster, the solid fuel rocket, moves beyond the edge of the boundary of the rest of the patch. I think it's a lovely upside down image. Everything about this patch I just like. It's even very scritchable. Challenger. Truly? Brandenstein. Thornton. Bluford. Gardner. STS-8 launched into space as Challenger performed the first night launch and carried Dick Truly, Daniel Brandenstein, Dale Gardner, Dr. Guion Buford, and Dr. William Thornton into space. Dr. Bluford had the honor of being the first black person in space, while Dr. Thornton was the oldest at 54. STS-8 carried the Indian National INSAT-1B, as well as 260,000 envelopes which NASA hoped to sell after the mission to recoup the costs of the mission. I would have bought one of those. I want one. Oh well. Several tests were performed aboard STS-8, including the separation of beta cells. Due to the fact that it was launched at night, STS-8 was able to view many hours of daylight over the southern hemisphere. The mission ended as Challenger touched down at Edwards, performing the only night landing in history. Would it be entertaining, this just occurred to me now, but would it be entertaining if I identified the patches for at least the rest of the shuttle missions that I don't have captured here and put them on my wish list so that you could slowly help me round up my collection? Would that be fun? I don't know. Another one that does not want to leave the paper behind. McBold. No, Merbold. McBold would be a great name. Parker. Young. Shaw. Columbia Space Lab 1. I like that one. It's big. It has the vaguely chevron shape of more military patches. They turned Shuttle Mission 9 into a lovely but subtle piece of the flight trajectory. It's a good patch. STS-9 lifted off on November 28th, 1983. Columbia carried as its crew the following people: John Young, Brewster Shaw, Dr. Owen Garriott, Dr. Robert Parker, and the West German Dr. Ulf Merbold. Dr. Merbold had the honor of being the first non-American to fly in a U.S. spacecraft. Dr. Byron Lichtenberg flew as well. There was only one payload on STS-9. This was Space Lab 1. Space Lab 1 is the European Space Agency's orbital laboratory. NASA and the ESA made a joint effort to create Space Lab 1. The launching of Space Lab symbolized the investment of over $1 billion by Europe into the U.S. space program. Experiments for Space Lab were provided jointly by the U.S., Japan, Canada, and 11 European countries. STS-9's 10-day flight landed with an uneventful landing at Edwards. C-H-A-L-L-E-N-G-E. Gibson. McCandless. McNair. I kind of like that this one has 2 inset pictures. One of a satellite launch and one of a manned maneuvering unit. And it's a great picture of the Challenger coming into land. But it doesn't really speak to me. Yes. And I'm trying to exaggerate it just a little bit. The crinkling of the paper, the pulling of the tape, and the scritching. I mean, those are all 3 very good ASMR triggers. Together, I think they make for pretty good content, even without talking our way through it. STS-11 lifted off from Cape Canaveral on February 3rd, 1984, with Vance Brand, Robert Hoot Gibson, Ronald McNair, Robert Stewart, and Bruce McCandless aboard, the last becoming the first human satellite by making a spacewalk with an MMU. The achievements of STS-11 were the launching of West Star 6 and Palapa B2, as well as extensive MMU testing. In conclusion, STS-11 became the first mission to land at Kennedy Space Center. For those of you who do not know the difference between a spacewalk and an MMU, with a spacewalk, you have a tether. With an MMU, you don a jetpack and you leave the shuttle. Period. You are your own independent space vehicle. Hope everything goes well. It does look a little like a volcano. Yeah. STS-41G. No, I do not happen to have a 30-patch gap. They just changed the numbering system. Went from 11 to 41, and then the next one after is 51. Despite all my previous comments on overly patriotic patches, if you're going to do a patriotic patch, that is darn pretty. Crippen, Sullivan, Leastma, Ride, McBride, Garneau, and Scully Power. I think I'm also just fond of imagery that uses the flag with folds in it. STS-41G fired into space with Robert Crippen, John McBride, Kathy D. Sullivan, Sally Ride, David Leastma, Paul Scully Power, and Mark Garneau aboard in the Challenger. It lifted towards space on October 5th, 1984 from Kennedy Space Center. Garneau had the honor of being the first Canadian on the shuttle, while Sullivan became the first woman to walk in space from the US STS-41G. Had the first crew that contained 2 women. Challenger carried with it the Earth Radiation Budget Satellite, OSTA-3, and 8 getaway specials, as well as the IMAX motion picture camera, the Aurora Photo Experiment, and the Canadian Canex. Crippen performed a re-entry over the eastern U.S. and landed easily at Edwards. And this one, again, has a belt buckle feel to it, but I kind of like it. We've seen a return of the eagle, the flag in the contrail. I don't know, I like it. Allen, Fisher, Gardner, Houck, and Walker. Yeah, I think you're right, Hayden. At least for my taste. STS-51A began as the Challenger soared skyward with Frederick Houck, David Walker, Joseph Allen, Anna Fisher, and Dale Gardner aboard. Ms. Fisher had the honor of being the first mother in space. This mission began on November 8, 1985. STS-51A carried Anik D2, SYNCOM 41, and a commercial experiment by the 3M Company. In addition to deploying these satellites, Challenger also retrieved Palapa B2 and West Star 6, which had failed to achieve their proper orbits when launched from STS-11. So they grabbed some space junk before it became bombs. That's good. And they deployed a commercial experiment by the 3M Company. The 3M Company is the one that makes Post-it notes. I really want to know what their orbital experiment was now. Yeah, I want to know that. I'm just really curious. They also make face masks and respirators. Okay, now there we're starting to see something that makes more sense to me as we are related to those kind of experiments. But I did not know that. Thank you, Nixalotl. I guess I should have known that. I remember having some 3M respirators when I worked at Hewlett-Packard. You know what is conspicuously missing from all these lists of satellites? GPS. None of the ones listed are even GPS satellites. This was the 80s. It wasn't until the 90s that that started to be a thing, and not until the 2000s that it became useful. We'll just leave these last two on here. STS-51C carried Ken Mattingly, Lauren J. Shriver, Ellison L. Onizuka, James F. Buckley, and Gary E. Payton away aboard the Discovery on January 24, 1985. Little is known about this mission due to its classified military nature. However, its cargo is known to be the Electric Monitoring, or SPY, satellite. For unrevealed purposes, the crew of the Discovery created their own communications blackout. On the mission patch, the 5 stars above the eagle symbolize the 5 crew members, and the 3 arrows clutched in its talons symbolize the military aspects of the flight. That was probably the launch of the first GPS satellites. Mattingly, Shriver, Buckley. Maizuka. Arrows. Stars. And it definitely has a military look to that symbol. Very much so. It should. But they were clearly going for the armed forces symbolism there. Bobco, Williams, Seddon, Griggs, Hoffman, Walker, and Garn. Discovery. STS-51D began as the Discovery carried Charles Walker, Carol Bobco, Donald Williams, Rhea Seddon, Jeffrey Hoffman, David Grigg, and Jake Garn away into space on April 12, 1985. STS-51D deployed Annex C-1, LASAT-3, and 2 getaway specials. It also carried the CFES and the echocardiograph experiment. On the patch, the flag is simply symbolic of the U.S. And it is quite the flag being wrapped around the world. So that is the last of the patches that I own. We made it as far as the first flights of the Discovery. We do not see the Atlantis. We do not see the Endeavour. I do not have the patch for the loss of the Challenger, although I knew someone on board, Judith Resnick. I believe she was the pilot. Nor do I have anything from the latter periods of the program. Around the time of the destruction of the Challenger, my mood towards this project rather significantly changed, and we did not continue on. Oh, sorry, I do have one more patch. The Manned Maneuvering Unit. I did not connect the dots completely earlier on. Part of the reason why I had considered going into aerospace engineering is that 2 of my uncles already had. In fact, in the cement that connects the heat tiles to the underside of the shuttles, my initials were actually marked on both the Columbia and the Challenger during construction. So were my grandmother's. It's a little unfortunate that it's the 2 that were destroyed, but I doubt that's related. Loss of heat tiles did play a role in the destruction of the Columbia, but, I mean, 15 years of maintenance, they all would have been replaced. Hello, Bellwind Darkstar. Nice to see you today, and welcome in. So after this point, there were quite a few additional shuttle missions. I believe they made it to somewhere around 70 missions before the program was ultimately canceled. And then, of course, there have been a number of unmanned launches and flights that involved, well, borrowing space with Russian flights, and now the Artemis and Ares programs and a renewed interest in space. Even at this point, there were also patches available for the Canadian program and the European Union space program, but I don't have them. You have the Apollo pictures with the astronauts and signed by them. That's cool. Somewhere around here, it's not the same in terms of its satisfaction, but somewhere around here I have a picture that I picked up at a convention that sadly I never managed to get signed by the second person involved. It is a picture from Star Wars of C-3PO and Chewbacca playing space chess, and I have it signed by Peter Mayhew, who is now dead, but I do not have Anthony Daniels' signature, and I believe he is also now dead, so I guess I shall not be able to finish that picture. Well, my friends, I have run out of space thingies to show you at this time. Considering that we're within 10 minutes of when we would normally wrap up in general, that might just be a good sign that I should do the usual thing and wrap up with a raid. I'm glad many of you have enjoyed this. I know it was a little outside the norm for us, but that can make it that much more fun. It also just felt like something that we could do as a true one-off and kind of show off a hobby at the same time. To wrap up the last few minutes, I had a good setup for Dune. Building on the idea of a good setup for Dune, though, let's talk about my upcoming plans, longer term. I mentioned that I needed to make some decisions about that next vacation. So I've worked out 3 potential destinations, and each of them has strengths and weaknesses as a travel plan. My goal in this next trip is to finish my bucket list by striding across Africa, the last inhabited continent for my list, since I'm not counting Antarctica. And there are essentially 3 ways that I can proceed. I could fly to Cape Town in South Africa. And if I fly to Cape Town in South Africa, the strengths are as follows. I can take a safari, an iconic experience associated with Africa. I can visit some of the local cities and explore apartheid history, which is at least uniquely interesting. I can see penguins on the southern tip of Africa. And it's an English-speaking country. The cons. It's also a 32-hour flight with a 1-day layover in Qatar, which means that I have to allot a whole lot more time to travel and recovery days. Since I may only have roughly 11 days to take the trip, that could potentially mean 2 days of travel on each end and a recovery day on each end. That leaves 5 days to actually enjoy South Africa. Mind you, the safari I've been looking at is 4, so that still leaves me some time. But that sounds exhausting and tight. Option number 2. Are they Scarpadin? Well, that's good to know. I did think the penguins would be cute. Option number 2 is that I could, of course, visit Cairo. And if I visited Cairo, we have another iconic Egyptian or iconic African experience in the pyramids. From there, I can get out to Luxor and other interesting sites and take a river cruise on the Nile. And it wouldn't be too terribly hard to hop up to Istanbul for a day or 2 and visit the Hagia Sophia and the Black Sea and more bazaars. and that would allow me to touch North Africa and West Asia in the same trip, and it would feel like I had branched a little bit into the Middle East because, well, Egypt. That's cheaper and faster and a little more cumbersome because the extra flight to Istanbul. But the problem with it is there isn't actually that much I want to do in Egypt or Turkey. The sites that I want to see in either can be done in 2 days. So then that starts to suggest, as my father has suggested, that I should circle around the Mediterranean, take advantage of the same trip, and visit more places. Perhaps Belgrade in Serbia or Bucharest in Romania, both of which are appealing. But then we get into a very vigorous and exhausting trip again, and the price starts to skyrocket. And if the whole point is to visit Africa, what am I doing in Belgrade? So that's a thought. Scarpadin, I'm a little nervous about visiting Tunisia. Of all the places that I have considered, Tunis does appeal to me, but it doesn't feel as safe as a solo traveler. I mean, if you go with tour groups, it should be perfectly fine either way, but it just doesn't feel as safe for some reason. That's also why I don't want to go to Algeria. I've already been to Greece, Belwyn Darkstar. I might try flying into Rhodes on the way to Istanbul since I got blocked out of there the last time that I went to Greece. After the Arab Spring, was it nice? Tell me more. But there's a third option, and the third option is Marrakesh and Casablanca visiting Morocco. The advantages of Marrakesh are that it's the cheapest of the travel options, and Marrakesh has a substantial amount of architecture and religious sites that I am very interested in seeing. Casablanca is also supposed to be an absolutely beautiful port, and you know, there's the cute factor of the movie. And it has a deeply ingrained storytelling culture, which still includes the concept of the person sitting in the town square telling stories to passers-by. And that culture means something to me. I kind of want to embrace it. But it's also the most remote from everything else. It isn't an iconic experience in Africa. I don't know. Morocco is also great, and you can see a lot of the same culture blends as Tunisia. That I do believe. The third option sounds like would be best for you, definitely worth consideration. I agree. It would be the easiest. But there's a certain part of me that says, how can I go to Africa and not see the pyramids, and not do a safari, and not even see Mount Kilimanjaro? Although in Morocco, I could certainly take a tour of the Sahara. Tons of Roman ruins, mosques, and Berber architecture. Absolutely. And I like Berber architecture. I think it's interesting. But the extra thing that factors into this is when I have toyed with the idea of expatriating myself after I retire and moving abroad, Morocco is actually one of the highlights of where I might try and wind up. So, I don't know, maybe it would be a research trip. A glass Arabic Coke bottle filled with sand? That sounds cute. Yeah, sand would be good. There are many things I could bring back from my alchemy set from Africa, but the sands of the Sahara seems like a good fit. Otherwise, it would just be spices. Oh, I should probably clarify that. It amuses me to bring back little tiny flasks, and we're talking ones that's smaller than a single digit of my finger, filled with some component that feels iconic and representative of my travels. I have one filled with black sand from the beach of Reynisfjara in Iceland on the North Sea. I have one filled with cherry blossoms that I brought back from Kyoto. I have one that is filled with the waters of the Aegean Sea, and despite having stopped it up with wax, it is slowly evaporating, so I am left with the stains of the salt crust and the air of the Aegean, which is kind of cool. And I have one that is Alaskan gold, adding Saharan sand or possibly saffron from the markets in Marrakesh. That could be fun too. The Himalayan salt would qualify for that, except that it's Himalayan salt that I bought at my local grocery store. It's not the same as something I bring back from beyond. Heck, technically I had to smuggle the black sand back. Have I ever been to London? I have not been to London. I have planned a couple of trips to London, but they fell through. Ultimately, they were just ways to... How best to describe it? I lost my grandmother a year or so ago, and that qualified me for bereavement leave, and so I thought quite sincerely about getting away for a little while. And so London came up as a potential destination for that. I had some friends there. There were some things I wanted to see. It just didn't happen. I just wasn't in the mood. I'll get there eventually, but it hasn't been a priority. And in case you need a recap of the list, I have been to Canada, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, Iceland, Greece, Spain, technically Germany and France if you count the airports, Australia, and now Japan. So I'm trying to get around just a little bit. Just a little bit. It's my thing. The flight to Cape Town is definitely a killer. You got extremely lucky last time and your row and coach was empty so you could sleep. Well, that's good. I'm not actually too worried about the flight to Cape Town. If I take the flights that I've been looking at, it's only about 10, 11 hours, which is the same as it was from Dallas to Buenos Aires. It's the part with the one-day layover in Qatar, because it means overall such a very long trip before I check into my hotel. That's all. Extremely lucky last time. Favorite trip to Europe was Slovenia. It was very beautiful. I have no doubt that's part of the reason why I was considering Belgrade and Bucharest. I even found a bus route from Bucharest that, based upon the stops where you change buses, is practically like retracing the plot of Dracula. But it just doesn't feel like the right trip. Papua New Guinea? It's an interesting choice. Did you go to Reykjavik in Iceland? Yes, I did go to Reykjavik. That's pretty much the only place to go in Iceland, at least in terms of cities. It's the only major settlement. Everything else is relatively small. You could go to Keflavik or Stikketrommur and maybe find a hotel, but 90% of the population is in that city. And it was fabulous. Reykjavik was fun. The My only regret for my trip to Iceland is that I forgot to book one of the walking tours of elf homes. That's all. And it was the first place that I traveled to where I felt like I just had fate guiding my hand in something. On my first day there, I wandered about and eventually wound up at Hallgrímskaya, which is the 10-story tall church that looks like the keel of a ship. It's very famous and absolutely lovely. And when I had been doing my research, the place that had popped out most for places to eat while I was in Reykjavik was a place called Cafe Loki. And wouldn't you know it, I had not taken note of where it was located. It was across the street from Hallgrímskaya. So I just had to stay and eat. And it was the first time I had lamb stew, which was absolutely phenomenal, as was the black bread. Elf homes. Yes, Dragon Mike. It is an accepted part of culture in Iceland that elves are a thing, and so are gnomes and similar creatures. And so they have little houses and look like somewhat like our miniature libraries or neighborhood libraries or little doll houses. They're scattered here and there. You can take walking tours that point them out, and this is cute. And I just didn't do it. Instead, I visited the Penis Museum. I'm not kidding. The Icelandic Phallological Museum, where every single exhibit is a penis. I just had to say I'd done it. The more disturbing part about that particular museum is not that all the exhibits are related to genitalia. There's actually a lot to be learned there. It's a bunch of animal exhibits, things of that nature. But the man who founded it donated his body to the museum as an exhibit upon his death. That's a little creepy. Have I been to Barcelona? Yes. When I said I had been to Spain, that's actually where I went. And sadly, from the perspective of the traveler that I have now become, I seriously missed an opportunity while I was in Barcelona. I had the chance to go skiing in Andorra, and I didn't do it. Oh well. Would have been another passport stamp for me. I like my passport stamps. So interesting. The thrust of the comments from chat seems to suggest that maybe Morocco is the best choice. I think I might have been leaning there anyway. I'm not sure. Did I visit the big cathedral? Yes, I did visit the Sagrada Familia at midnight while it was lit up and absolutely gorgeous, even though it was still under reconstruction. It was closed. I couldn't get in. That was an... Frequent followers of this channel will be aware that I collect vivid memories from my travels. Those are the main things that I want to acquire. And my vivid memory from the Sagrada Familia was of the interesting, let's call it, contrast between having this massive holy spectacle lit up by night, gorgeous, serene, even wrapped in scaffolding. But I was viewing it from the park across the street, which at midnight was absolutely filled with prostitutes and their dates. Every bench. That was an interesting contrast. Just pictured the sounds I was hearing while looking at this beautiful building. Well, it meant I didn't linger. Yeah, it meant I didn't linger. It was an interesting contrast. And I don't have any pictures of my visit to the Sagrada Familia, because that was long enough ago that I took those pictures with a digital camera, not a cell phone, and the digital camera was stolen by a pickpocket. So, lost that. Honestly, Barcelona isn't a city I would recommend. I want to. It has a number of beautiful buildings, and I like the presence of its old town ports and its cobblestone streets, but it is infamous for pickpockets. And it smelled like garbage. I mean, that literally, there was a garbage strike going on while I was there. And I don't like fish. Not especially, at least. Which meant that having paella be the primary dish wherever I went, usually complete with eyes still on the crayfish and things of that nature, did not work for me. Well, our experiences were obviously different, Nixolotl, but I mean, that could also be because I was primarily there to work. Unlike all of my other trips, I was there for a reason, and the only time that I could play tourist and do things of my own occasion, it was late at night or early in the morning. I only had one free day, so I didn't really get to enjoy things like street performers, and I only got to see limited amounts of the architecture. I should have enjoyed it more. But, I mean, it's still a good city. It's just, even then, I could see the effects of Spain's economy collapsing, and that was 2008. I liked Madrid and Seville better, to be honest. Yeah, I can believe that. Orange trees in Seville would be awesome. I'd like to make it to Madrid someday because I would really like to get to Alcalá de Henares. I am told that they have turned Cervantes' childhood home into a bed and breakfast, and I really want to stay there. You're going to London next month, lolpoggers? Well, that's cool. I hope you have a wonderful time. I definitely saw enough that I could have easily spent a week just admiring the sights that I am interested in the central part of London, and that's without ever leaving the city or even exploring its fringes. Which reminds me, part of that was the British Museum, which is one other thing I want to see in Cairo. I want to see the British Museum there, or the Egyptian Museum, whichever you want to call it. Madrid Art Museum was your favorite of any art museum you've been to? That's interesting. Is that where Dali has most of his work? A patented ear boop for the Nexus. Ear boop, ear boop, ear double boop, and smooch. And as with every patented ear boop, you get a Professor Snuggles approved silly nickname. And the Nexus, your new nickname is... Let's see, play it off of Nexus. This is where things come together. We'll go with an art reference. Vanishing Point. You are Vanishing Point, also known as VP. How do you like that, Nexus? You're now VP. Goya exhibit. Oh, that's interesting. I have not been to anything in Washington, D.C., that was actually an option instead of the trip to London. But the biggest thing that I wanted to see there was the Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian, and it is under reconstruction. 90% of it is basically closed. The Garden of Earthly Delights. Well, my friends, talking travel is obviously something I enjoy, and we could probably manage to make a full stream out of just travel stories someday, and who knows, maybe we will. But for right now, I'm thinking it is time to start looking for that raid. Hieronymus Bosch. Oh, nice. Smithsonian Museum was very busy, but other than that, it was quite cool and interesting. I would expect the Smithsonian to be busy, frankly. They say to buy your tickets in advance for a reason. Jack is indeed on, and even though it looks like she's been on for 3 hours, it doesn't look like she's wrapping up right this second. Yeah, let's visit Jack. Our Audible link, our Discord link, our YouTube link, which I expect to start getting busier with again soon. Our raid tags for those with and without subs. Again, it has been an absolute pleasure, every single one of you. It's supposed to take a week for shipping for the Dune volume, so who knows if we'll have it in time on Tuesday, but that's what we're going to try and start next week. And this has been a great deal of fun. Thank you for joining me as we wandered through our space history and a collection. I mean, it's kind of fun to actually get some use out of the kinds of things that you put together when you're a kid, right? I was kind of amazed that I still had it. But for now, let's go and visit our friend Jack the Mermaid, who also was one of our major players in the Cozy D&D experiment. But now she's gone back to singing because that's what she's good at, and she is just adorable. So give her some love, and let's go a reading now.